And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Located in Tahltan Nation, the Golden Triangle in BC is located in the northwest part of the province and is a mining site before Canada was even a country. On today's Open Connection, we bring you highlights of last year's Nation to Nation conference featuring a partnership between Tahltan and Newcrest.
Give a brief overview of who Newcrest is. So one of the largest gold producers in the world. We currently have portfolio. We have operations in Asia Pacific, South America and North America, and our key thing is around being a miner of choice in our host nations. So as you said, we've got operations all over. We entered into Canada in 2019 when we entered the joint venture with Imperial at Red Chris. We currently are the operator of that mine and have been successfully sort of improving the operation there, and with lots of growth planned for that project. And in 2022, so the start of this year, we closed the deal to take over Prentim and the Bridgejack mine, and that's now 100% controlled by Newcrest. One of our commitments is around executing high environmental performance, and that's really what underpins our building up of our relationship with the host communities. And with that, we have sort of 4 key areas we tackle. It's all around looking after our people, so they go home health and safety every day. We look after the environment that we work within, exercising best practice, and we want to make sure we maintain that with an ethical approach. And then finally, it's all around how do we build and maintain strong relationships with the host communities. One key thing that's really important to Newcrest is around health and safety, and something that we're pretty proud of since taking over Red Chris, is we're implementing our safety transformation plan, which is a little bit different than most. We talk about how we personalise safety, and we take an approach where everyone has a behaviour in executing safety. So since taking over Red Chris in 2019, we've halved the reportable injuries, workplace injuries at the site, and we continue to strive to do better there. Another key thing that we're rolling out at our operations is our Respect at Work program, and that's really setting up a place where we can have a diverse and inclusive workforce and people can front up to work at their best self. And that's something that we're really putting a lot of effort into at the moment. Community relations is something that we've put a lot of effort into since taking over the operations in Red Chris. And the key thing was to build up a really strong team. That team is based predominantly with First Nation representation. 65% of the team is from the communities. And the second part to that was to make sure that we had people in the communities to present that direct conduit or the liaison capacity between the communities and the operations, and to create a free-flowing passive information set. A couple of key things, and then I'll hand it over to Calvin. Really, Red Chris we're quite fortunate when we took over the operation coming in. It has some quite structured systems in place around how we started this partnership. So we have a IBCA, which defines the establishment of a project advisory committee, and then below that we have our subcommittees. So we have an environmental oversight committee and our social cultural committee, which are both fundamental and feed up into the PAC committee. Below that, we also have an independent review panel which looks at the tailings facility, and that then also provides advice up to the PAC. And I'll let Calvin talk about the PAC itself now.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. In 1998, Chilcotin First Nations entered into a complex legal journey when they objected to British Columbia's issuing private logging authorizations in their traditional territory. 16 years later, the Supreme Court of Canada granted Indigenous title to the Chilcotin First Nation. Let us return to the conversation as Calvin shares how this court decision affected First Nations communities in Canada.
Around 2014, there was a huge change in our legal landscape that all First Nations benefited from. She's from the First Nation. Chilcotin First Nation took Canada to court, and it turned out in their favor, but it turned out in all of our favor. First Nations title and right. So that's a key date in 2014, which changed the business landscape of Canada and capitalism. which brings the Tahltan central government into play. We've already had semi-co-management arrangements with other mining companies, but before then, it wasn't as powerful as title and right is today, which we are thankful for. And this is where I get to brag about Newcrest, of course, because they did buy out a company that we did not have the greatest relationship with. So before Newcrest came along, another company was in place, and while they were purchasing the company, they were telling them, hey, you know, these Tahltan people are hard to deal with. They're kind of difficult. You know, they kind of want fair negotiations. They kind of want fair and safe workplaces. It's weird. So look out. Ben comes on. He's like, wow, we were really prepared to deal with you guys, and we couldn't believe how great it was. So our nation, of course, it is my mandate to optimize the well-being of our Tahltan people. That's socioeconomically, physical health. Our Tahltan people optimize their well-being. So well-being means everything. And that's what I think about all the time when we're operating at the Tahltan central government. And to optimize the usage of our land. When I say land, it means air, water, our wildlife, you name it. So those two things I'm always thinking about. Optimize our people's well-being and optimize our land's well-being. And then we have meetings like this. But through that, we have a very productive and awesome, as you can tell, co-management relationship. Not to the point, though, that I can't hold him accountable. So I said, we can be friends until a point. Then after that, I got to remember, I still have to advocate. Nonetheless, so this is our system. So within co-management, we can think about the big buzzwords these days is what? ESG. Everyone talks about environmental social governance. And someone over here told me before they added an I. I think I'll learn about that later. But which comes down to what's co-management with us. Well, with the Tahltan, we have pretty good IBA. I'm not going to discuss that, but it has very favorable terms. I really thank corporations within our territory, of course. Like you said, 65% of their workforce is First Nations. For me, what that means, it means socio-economic well-being for our people, which makes us happy. One of the examples for co-management, real co-management, is we have the PAC committee, which is the place I get to go to as the operational leader for the government and advocate on terms with Anne, who's down there. She also advocates for our IBA with employment and business opportunities. Nothing's ever perfect, so I do go there with things to share with these guys on how they can improve and vice versa. So I always try to respect a mutual place to give each other hell. And I tell them too, well, tell me what I can improve on, but it's not going to be one way. So co-management-wise, we have the PAC committee, and then environmental-wise, we have the, what is it specifically called? Environmental Oversight Committee. So you can tell it's part of the IBA where the company invites in Tahltan representatives to co-manage environmental decisions or reports. Social-cultural committee, where we work on social-cultural topics that involve Tahltan and the visiting Newcrest Corporation. So overall, those are examples of us co-managing with the awesome corporation. And I'm happy to sit here because I was also here when the previous corporation was there. And I'll tell you, their attitude was, we are a bother, and this is an additional hurdle to deal with. And then Newcrest came in, and the attitude completely changed to, hey, let's get this done. Let's work together. How are you feeling? You want a coffee? And before you know it, we mutually move forward in life. They got to their objectives. The Tahltan Nation, Tahltan people got to their objectives. And everyone's mutually happy for the most part.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The Golden Triangle is so named because it hosts some of the richest gold ore bodies in the world, as well as abundant silver, nickel, and copper deposits. In 2020, Red Chris production was 88.3 million pounds of copper and 73,787 ounces of gold. Let us return to the conversation with Ben Wither.
One of the things that we purchased Red Chris for is it has an extreme potential from an underground perspective, so it's going to be a large block cave, which we're currently in the permitting process for. So one of the things we wanted to do is to make sure when we went through the permitting process, we leveraged the existing formal arrangements. So we used PAC, which then had the Environmental Oversight Committee underneath, but what we found was a bit of a gap in terms of communicating all the technical aspects of what we plan to do, because a lot of it is very new to Canada. So we formed a subcommittee, which then we brought on board subject matter experts and then members from Taltan team, and we walked through each of the different steps of the process prior to any for engagement from a permitting perspective. So we would walk through how we were going to develop the underground, what the impacts were in each of the different aspects before we then made application. So prior to it going through to regulators, it had already been through a process of vetting within with the First Nation, with Taltan itself. What that has helped us do is to make sure when we get through to condition forming or draft conditions, we've already both agreed on what we sort of know is the outcome base that we're looking for. And it's something that's helped us permit this project in phases. So we're actually doing it in multi-phases. So we've permitted the exploration activity at the moment. We're about to get the permit for the pre-production work, so we're going to do all the advanced development, which means that we will be at a point where we can start our production much faster, but in that process we're actually able to assess the impacts in each of its specific phases and not trying to overwhelm everyone with the larger, more significant piece of the impact, so each piece is digestible. Another piece that sort of forms into the permitting process is the social baseline study. So this is something that is being led by TCG. We're a partner in terms of supporting it, but it is owned and driven by TCG. And the reason that we really wanted to get through to this piece was there was some perceived or presumed assumptions around knowledge, what was going on, but we wanted to make sure we rebuilt that understanding and set that up so we had a true understanding between the two parties about what was going on. And that helps inform our permitting process to make sure we can understand and manage some of the social impacts that come with this large scale. But I guess the key thing for us was, like everyone in the room, we were dealing with a common enemy or a common goal, and that was to make sure that we could manage the potential introduction or transmission of COVID from our workplaces into the community. So for that, we established a really strong relationship with the Taltan Emergency Management Committee. And our common goal was to make sure we protected local communities who are most at risk and have a joint response to how that worked. So the collaborative approach itself, and I'll talk to a few details here and then I'll get Calvin to talk from a TCG perspective, but it was essentially a collaborative response. We coordinated and shared all of the information we were getting from our internal experts plus with the Northern Health, and we used risk to make sure we focused our resources to the specific things and didn't get overwhelmed with everything. The key thing for us was looking at breaking it down into small bubbles, or essentially forming clean bubbles, which allowed the local workforce to be able to come back and forth to work and not have risk of transmitting back. We brought in testing protocols, we brought in a whole raft of access to advanced medical response in terms of PPE and medical supplies. And then we also helped set up a process whereby we could manage or administer the movement of people within the territory. So if they were coming through to work, we had a sign-off process so that we didn't have people coming back and forth and putting the communities at risk as well. And that was only successful because we had the support from the chiefs.
The EMC is a good example of, corporate citizenship and local communities working together. I'm trying to optimize the well-being of the Taltan people through social economic stuff like jobs and careers, but it also comes into effect when you have a COVID pandemic and you have communities who have little to no health infrastructure, so they're especially at risk. If we sat there and did a risk assessment, we'll be like, mining companies, danger, because they bring in people from everywhere and they could bring in COVID, and that's another crisis for our local communities. So I would say this is an extremely good example of how the local Newcrest mine did not make excuses. Rather, they were very proactive. Hey, we can provide resources. Hey, we can provide people. We'll let you know what's going on. We'll let you be a part of the decisions on how we protect you from COVID. And the EMC was one of the vehicles where they had an input, but also the local advocates had an input on how they can feel safe. Overall, I think the success rate of the EMC and their decisions and actions was, I don't think you had any, well, anyhow, there was no infections that came from Newcrest. Am I right with that? That was brought into the community. So it was, I would say, almost 100% success rate with that EMC body.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In recent years, community investment has become increasingly important. Not only does investing in the local community benefit the company by fostering positive reputation and customer loyalty, but it also has a positive impact on the community by creating jobs and supporting local businesses. In this final segment of Open Connection, both Calvin and Ben share the benefits of community investing.
Community Investment Fund, and we funneled in $1.2 million into the territory around some of the critical things that needed support during that time. The EMC itself was actually awarded the David Barr Health and Safety Award for their response to the pandemic as well. For us as an operation, we were able to maintain continuity in operations. What that actually means for us in a bigger picture was that everyone was able to maintain employment continuity throughout that process, when many other areas we were seeing redundancies and impact to employment. So that was a key focus for us. There was no COVID cases during the first 3 waves of the program, which was another huge thing. And then the last real piece that I think was a big one for us was, we entered that relationship with Tahltan Nation when we bought the project with some uncertainty. We had lots of tension we thought was there. There's nothing faster than fast-tracking that relationship and having to deal with a common enemy. So one of the things I think we're pretty proud of is how fast we were able to get that, break down the barriers around trust and transparency, and use that to leverage some of the future partnerships in terms of how we're dealing with things at the operation as well. So for me, it was a privilege, and I'm hopeful I never have to do one again, but it was still something that I look back on very fondly.
It was great to welcome Newcrest. I mean, immediately you could feel their attitude towards dealing with First Nations, which we were, I'm sure some of you know the Tahltan people are extremely proud, and we're very outspoken. But for the most part, there's a mutual benefit that goes on when you speak with corporations, right? I'm looking for the best opportunities for our people and their businesses to do business. But at the same time, you have to balance that with optimizing the well-being of your land, right? So mining's great, but we're not going to do it if it's a complete danger to our land base. So overall, it's a win-win for us, and especially dealing with Newcrest, we were able to fast-track that. So what makes us proud is we understand we are a process risk to big industrial firms. And we never use that as a point of leverage. But I would say the process with Newcrest was amazing. And as the Tahltan Central Government, we do pride ourselves as being partners, and we do mutually try to go out of our way for each other. Unless, like I said, it's a danger to optimizing the well-being of our land. And as you've seen in the headlines in the past, Tahltans are also opposed to certain projects.
With that, we obviously, one of the things we want to be in Northern Canada is growth. So we have been investing quite heavily in BC, and part of that is around building a positive relationship with our host nations. There's significant investment going into both Bruce Jack and Red Chris in terms of long-term growth. Both operations will be multi-generational, and we want to make sure we set ourselves up for the future in both of those cases. There is significant investment going into the local communities that we feed off, and that's through our sustainability fund. And then the last bit is really around investing in environmental stewardship, and that's how we utilise natural resources, whether it's power, water, and the environment itself specifically. And that's really our focus in that space. So a key thing that supports that is around investing in our people. And for us, there's quite a few metrics up there. The big one that jumps out for me is 20% of our workforce is Taltan members or associates. We have a 19% female employment, which is another key thing for us. We're obviously trying to improve both of those. And a large percentage of the workforce comes from BC and local specifically. But the bit that I'm most proud of is the next slide. I think the jobs to careers piece. Is that up? Yep. So one of the things that mining industry is really, really good. We always promise we'll give you plenty of jobs. We can create jobs. We can get lots of jobs. And unfortunately, a lot of those jobs are always entry-level jobs and they don't really go anywhere. So what we've been really focusing on at Newcrest is around setting up career paths. So move past a simple job to a career where someone can invest their time. One, they want to become an employee, want to come to work, which is great for us, but also then bring with them that diverse thinking and inclusivity. So a couple of examples that really speak to me is the top left-hand side, I've got to reverse it, is Dustin. So Dustin Tashoots, he was an equipment operator at Red Chris and was trying to work his way through, and he wanted to drive the shovel. He was unsuccessful in getting through to shovel operator, and he was wasn't really sure what was going on. The reason was because we saw that he was a natural leader. So we've actually put him through a leadership program, and he's now the first open pit shift boss for Taltan, I believe. So when I took over at Red Chris, Shannon was in mine ops administration, and we realised pretty quickly that she had a bit of an inkling to social investment, and so we brought her into the social performance team or community relations team, and she has been exceptional and was pivotal during COVID in terms of the community investment fund. And
within the food hamper, I found that they were good. Then the dry goods, it was just like to the basics, and that was perfect. It was a broad selection of meats because they built all breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The day of the delivery, it went very smoothly because we've done this so many times before. This one, it just was like smooth. Within an hour and a half to 2 hours, we had them all done up, put in bins, and put aside for community members, so it was really good. With the pandemic and everything else, it's nice because we have food brought in. We don't have to leave community to get it with our little store, and also other grocery stores. Everything's going up in price, so this was a big bonus for us.
The food hampers that were provided by Red Chris was amazing. Like, it's very much appreciated by the community. That's what a household needs. They had a very positive effect for sure, because the people that were coming in to pick them up were quite happy with it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.